Oh my god, hey. If you're seeing my face for the first time, my name is Mickey Joe, I am obsessed with all things theatre, and this is my stagey YouTube channel. Once again, I am not super looking forward to filming this video for multiple reasons. One of them is I have super swollen, scratchy tonsils right now, so I don't want to talk. And also, I don't want to talk specifically about this. The last time I talked about trans issues on here, the comments section got interesting. Also, as someone who has been advocating for LGBTQ+ issues since day one, which right now, in the present climate that we're in, means supporting trans people because they're experiencing such a greater level of oppression and stigmatization, it's crazy exhausting seeing the relentless campaign of hate directed towards the transgender community. And that's just coming from me. I can only imagine how they feel experiencing this. You know, we can barely go a day without some increasingly irrelevant celebrity revealing that they're deeply transphobic. But here's the thing, I think anyone who has any kind of a platform has a responsibility, and I have 5,000 and something of you guys that I get to speak to now on YouTube, and that's a responsibility I take very seriously. When I can bring awareness to something and let you know that something is happening, it's absolutely something I'm going to do, whether I super want to or not. That being said, if my voice sounds super tired during this, it's my tonsils. I might just have some water that's definitely water and not a thinly veiled message. Refreshing. So let's just get into this. This week's news story in Theatreland is about Sir Cameron Mackintosh, the producer, and his comments about transgender casting in musical theatre. He made a statement that casting trans actors in musicals would be considered gimmick casting. The world of musical theatre reacted, performers and fans alike, and then he issued some sort of a retraction, slightly half-heartedly. Let's talk through this story from back in the beginning. So I'd like to provide you with a little bit of context here, without getting into crazy specifics. Transgender casting in musicals is incredibly new, and for many years it hasn't been considered. Trans people have not been warmly welcomed into the world of musical theatre. They have been excluded even from playing trans roles. The Broadway production of Jagged Little Pill rewrote the identity of their main character in its transfer to Broadway from the out-of-town tryout, so that their casting wouldn't be considered transphobic by casting a cisgender performer in a trans role. Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, has for a decade now been casting cisgender men in a trans female role. And shortly before COVID-19 shut down the UK theatre community, a musical adaptation of the film Breakfast on Pluto was commissioned for the Donmar Warehouse, where Frafi, a cisgender male actor, was cast in a trans female role. Another trans woman was cast in a cisgender role in the same production, but dropped out amidst the backlash and controversy. Fast forward to 3 weeks ago, when Cameron Mackintosh is asked whether he would consider casting trans performers in musicals. In his musicals, the classics. The article specifically seems to talk about the show Mary Poppins and the character of Mary Poppins. Sir Cameron states that casting trans actors in these roles would be considered gimmick casting. It wouldn't be true to that story, the story of that family in the show, and it would distort the plot for audiences who might be coming to see the show for the first time and not already know the story. What he suggested instead was that new young writers should write material that would feature trans performers in a more authentic way. Now, he doesn't offer to fund any of this or actually produce any meaningful work by queer theatre makers or trans theatre makers, which super exists, by the way. No, instead he just offers it out in the Daily Mail, which of course all of the young queer theatre makers are definitely reading. Now, it took everyone about 3 weeks to realise that these comments had been made, because unfortunately they were printed in the Daily Mail, which nobody reads. But once it did make its way onto theatre Twitter, oh boy! Everyone reacted. First, the immediate West End pundits reacted, the obvious people who advocate for LGBT rights, the obvious trans advocates, and then it spread satisfyingly to a great many people who all weighed in on what transphobic nonsense this was, that it would be a gimmick to cast trans actors in a cisgender role. When I first thought about making this video, I was going to read through some of the reactions from people on Twitter, but in the time that it took me to actually sit down and film this, there have been just so many. It spread to Broadway, you know, it spread to people who have worked with Sir Cameron Mackintosh in a lot of his productions. Carrie Hope Fletcher weighed in on this. Fra Fee weighed in on this, who I mentioned earlier, the actor who was cast as a trans woman. He condemned these comments, but there was somewhat of a backlash to this. It seemed slightly hypocritical because he still hasn't spoken out on the controversy of him accepting the role of a trans woman some years previous, especially since he is name-dropped in the article in the Daily Mail. So for him to talk about what Sir Cameron Mackintosh has said and how he doesn't agree with this, but not really acknowledge the rest of the article is dicey. Now, I thought, how brave of people to be speaking up, because you know, when it's a powerful producer, the temptation is just not to say anything at all, because he controls a lot of people's careers. He has provided a great many of the people who have spoken out about this with a great many incredible opportunities that have changed the trajectory of their careers. So I thought, good for you, actors of the West End and Broadway. But I didn't really think that this was going to go anywhere, nor did I think he was actually going to respond. Now, the reason for that is when someone usually is getting cancelled on social media, you see it in their comments sections, you see it on their Twitter feeds. Cameron Mackintosh does not have Instagram. Thank God. What would that look like? And so there's no real way to engage with him directly in a way that's public. Also, he exists in such an ivory tower so high above the rest of the industry in his penthouse flat above Mamma Mia, which is true, by the way, and strange. He doesn't really have to engage in the fodder because he is so protected by the enormous wealth that he hoards like a fictional dragon. And yet, against all odds, he actually did. I was so astonished to read this, but he actually issued... Now, apology is a strong word, but for the sake of this video, that's what we'll pretend it was. Let me read it to you. Sir Cameron said, "I was recently asked by a journalist if I would consider making the character of Mary Poppins, not the actor playing the role, a transgender woman. Unfortunately, my answer has been misinterpreted to suggest that I am opposed to casting a transgender performer to play the role. This is absolutely not true." He goes on to lie a little bit more. "I meant only that I would not, as a producer, disregard the author P.L. Travers' original intention for the character. The author, by the way, who would be turning in her grave to know that the character is now a tap-dancing, beautiful star of a West End musical. To be clear, whether a person is trans has no bearing on their suitability for any role in any of my shows, including Mary Poppins, as long as they can perform the role as written," which I guess is why, to my knowledge, he has never cast any trans performer in any of his productions. "I am very sorry for any distress caused by my remarks being misinterpreted. Trans actors are welcome to submit an audition for any of my productions. Good effing luck. I have long been and will continue to be a proponent of diversity in casting for my projects around the world." So you heard it here first. Sir Cameron Mackintosh is really a champion of diversity, which is why he cast a white man to play an Asian character in the original West End and Broadway productions of Miss Saigon, and allegedly barred any non-white children from auditioning for the most recent production of Mary Poppins at the Prince Edward Theatre. What a man. He's also well known for originally producing The Phantom of the Opera, which is just now casting the first black actress to play Christine after 30-something years. And also Cats, which, while I don't have any statement to make about its diversity, I just thought it's important to mention alongside a statement where he's talking about authenticity in casting. Because, you know, Cats. Now let's consider this statement for a second. He is suggesting his words were misinterpreted. He was actually talking about the character of Mary Poppins not being a trans woman. And even if we take that as the truth, first of all, literally no one has ever asked for that, and I don't think anyone really cares. Second of all, when we're talking about a magical tap-dancing nanny who descends from the heavens with an umbrella, I don't know that the exact specificity of her gender identity is really the most crucial part of that plot. I'd go as far as to say it super doesn't matter, but that's just me. Now, where this falls apart is where he used the phrase gimmick casting. And if you're talking about gimmick casting, you're not talking about the character, you're talking about casting a performer in a role. If he was talking about making Mary Poppins trans, then casting a trans actor wouldn't be gimmick casting. It's only gimmick casting if he thinks that's what it would mean to cast a trans actor in a cisgender role. Which means the statement he was really making is that he doesn't believe trans actors can play cisgender roles. Now do you see why it adds insult to injury to such an extent when trans actors are also barred from playing trans roles? This is what I was talking about in the Priscilla Queen of the Desert video. I don't think trans actors should be limited to trans roles, but I think trans roles should be restricted to trans actors. And this is because their exposure is so wildly limited as it is, so unfairly. These roles that they have a unique insight and perspective on, especially one like Bernadette in Priscilla Queen of the Desert, where the character's trans identity is so crucial to the story that they tell, and it's such a beautiful trans story they are telling in an LGBT musical. I think it is important a transgender performer be able to bring their authenticity to that role. Not exact truth, I understand acting is acting, but authenticity is important, and that's what makes a great performance. Musical theatre performances do not have to be an exact reality, but they have to have truth in them. Now, this story has come at an interesting time because in the last week, completely coincidentally, I have been to see 2 musicals. One, a big family-friendly show on tour, the other one, an artsy revival in the West End, both of whom feature trans and non-binary performers. And that's in principal roles, in singing roles, in featured roles, in ensemble roles. And in all of those instances in those 2 shows, it's completely incidental to the plot. It makes no difference to the story, they're just excellent performers who are able to bring their talent to these roles. And these aren't trans roles that they happen to have been playing, they don't need to be. Trans women are women, trans men are men, and they can play those characters on stage. It doesn't impact the plot, it doesn't impact the production, it's fine, it's good, it's the future, in fact. It filled my heart, to be honest, seeing trans performers getting these opportunities and that people would be able to see this authentic, beautiful representation on stage. For so long, that just hasn't existed. It's a step in casting that has arrived disproportionately late in an otherwise allegedly tolerant industry. Now back to Sir Cameron Mackintosh. I was asked the other day in an Instagram Q&A whether I thought people should boycott his productions. And if that's something that you want to do out of your principles, great, I support you. I think that's awesome. I think you can be incensed with rage about this, as I am, and still understand that boycotting his productions is not necessarily the answer. The reason for that is there are so many other people who will suffer before he does. The level of wealth that he has attained as a billionaire, it's going to take a very long time before you financially impact him, and you'll have to close shows and put so many people out of work before that happens. Additionally, in the makeup of West End audiences, especially the ones who go and see his big shows, the Hamiltons, the Les Mises, the Phantom of the Operas, a surprising minority of those are theatregoers who are going to have any idea this is even going on. The vast majority of the audiences at Delfont Mackintosh theatres will be tourists, will be families, will be people going to the theatre who don't do it regularly, who have no idea that this discourse is even taking place. So you can boycott his shows, but it's not going to make a significant difference to the ticket sales. If you don't think you're able to support him financially, that's also an absolutely acceptable decision. I think we all have to make our own choices on that front, but I recognise that in this situation, a boycott isn't necessarily going to be very effective. What will be is lending your voice in solidarity to the marginalised trans community. Speaking up about this, having important conversations with friends, with family, with other theatre fans, letting them know that this is happening, what your perspective on it is, why it's important we have this conversation, that I think is a lot more valuable. And that's what I will be doing. Tomorrow night, I will be going to the press night of a play written by a trans theatre maker, starring a trans performer, about an important trans story, commissioned by a theatre who are platforming multiple works by trans performers, by trans theatre makers, because that's a thing that's very easy for them to do. They are utilising their stages to give back to that community, to give them a voice, to give them space, to give them agency in telling their own stories. That's what's important. That's the future of theatre. Punching down at an underrepresented and all too frequently attacked community that you're already barring from access to your lofty, privileged, white West End productions is not the future. It is the distant, distant past that I wish we weren't still living in. Now, I'm sure people will have a lot of thoughts about this. You are welcome to weigh in the comments section, and you don't have to agree with me. I'm not expecting everyone to agree with me. This is just my thoughts, my feelings. However, what I absolutely refuse to see is any kind of transphobia in this comments section. If I do see any transphobic comments, they will simply be removed. And that's not censorship. It's not impacting your rights to free speech. It is me exercising my rights to moderate this little corner of the internet that I live on. If you want to go and broadcast your feelings on YouTube, you're welcome to do that as well, but not here in my internet house. In my internet house, we take off our shoes before we come in, we respect each other's pronouns, and we acknowledge that trans lives matter. That trans rights are human rights, and trans and non-binary performers are not a gimmick. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel for plenty more stagey content about all your favourite shows coming very soon. I hope that everyone is staying safe, uplifting those who need your voice, and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!